I've got some good news for you. Losing weight just got easier. WW Weight Watchers Reimagined has a groundbreaking new program called MyWW that matches you with your very own customized weight loss plan. All you do is take the new MyWW personal assessment, answer simple questions about things like your eating habits and behaviors to unlock your own plan that can make losing weight easier.
Head on over to WW.com. That's WW.com to join WW today with a limited time offer.
Jim, and
receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 675.MK0333, certificate number 12952. Mother Jones.
Have you ever considered unionizing this show?
I'm kind of afraid that there's a union's going to form, and that you and I, as the bosses, are going to be left holding the bag.
I thought that we would be unionizing against the bosses.
But we're the bosses.
Now we are. That's true. We almost struck against our corporate overlords.
That's true.
But we were too invested in providing the futurelings with this information.
We didn't want to risk it.
Right.
And also, we didn't want to call up a bunch of other podcasters and see if they would, hold up a piece of paper that says union.
Can you imagine
and see if they'd do it?
A union of podcasters? What a multi-headed hydra that would be.
Yeah, good luck trying to have a march because you'd have to get them out of the house.
But we are generally pro-labor, given that you and I are both on the what would be described traditionally as the left end of the political spectrum.
I think so. And I'm not even one of these unions were great in their time, but boy, they sure messed everything up. Like, I kind of feel like the weakening of the labor movement in America has actually done a lot of harm.
So you remain pro-union?
Yeah.
Wow. Controversial stance.
I feel like you don't want to be one of those guys who was like, X was good, but it went too far. Because then what if X is the civil rights movement,
I also remain pro-union. My dad was a labor organizer, a labor activist.
Did he travel around? He just traveled around America trying to?
No, he worked primarily as an arbitrator here in Washington.
Like big companies, like Boeing, or?
No, it was the waterfront. He was an arbitrator for the longshoremen's union and the stevedores and whatnot.
So waterfront and labor unions, two things that are never mobbed up at all. Like, was there any crime issues going on?
Oh, there's always crime, Ken. Think about all the crime that happens.
I bet
you're gonna overturn the milk cow because of one cup of Tang.
We could all make a nice profit here.
Sure.
That's my motto.
Sure.
We can figure this out.
Hand me that envelope that's tucked into your jacket. Well, the story of the labor unions in the United States is a kind of a tremendous story, a tremendous tale, and an elaborate and multivarious,
cross-generational.
Yeah.
It's
and happening both simultaneously and alongside what's happening in Europe at the same time, and the rise of kind of collective theory and the rights
Socialism.
of labor, but also happening in a very distinctive American way.
It's kind of funny that it ever happened. You know, when you look at the state of America now, you really don't feel like it's the kind of culture where a workers' movement would take root.
Well, it's funny because we're living in an era now that we recognize as kind of a time when capital has kind of coalesced in among a very few, and capitalism has become very concentrated and corporatized and calcified.
You can't seize the means of production now. Like, it's like four guys. What are the odds you're going to meet one of them?
But
good luck seizing the means of production when that guy won't get off his plane.
Though this that we're seeing now has happened multiple times in just the short period of the American couple of centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very height of the sort of robber baron era of the late 19th century, capital was consolidated at about the same level as it is now.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Like by measures of income inequality or controlled percentage of GNP or whatever?
Yeah, the 1% then controlled the same proportion of the capital as the 1% now.
They just owned more monocles.
They own more monocles. They own more railroads and coal mines, and
more mutton chops per capita.
The rich now own comparatively few railroads and coal mines. Although the friend of the show, Warren Buffett, is
listener Warren Buffett. Hey Warren,
is consolidating his rolling stock. Right, He decided he was going to get into the railroad business.
Today it's all virtual railroads.
Wisely.
People just get into the digital railroad that is Facebook.
Yeah.
It's always railroading people.
It's a series of tubes.
It's like, except we're the cattle getting loaded onto the cars now.
Although Elon Musk really into that he
wants a tube.
That cost overrun plagued tube.
He just wants a single tube. He doesn't want a series of tubes. He sees that and thinks, I just want one tube.
One fast tube.
One long tube.
One fast tube and then I'm
like
gone.
when you put the cylinder in the thing at the bank and it goes...
Pneumatic tube.
It's like a pneumatic tube, but he's like, what if that, but between Vancouver and San Francisco?
Pneumatic tubes is on my list of omnibus topics.
It's going to be, by the time you hear this, we have done the pneumatic tubes show. It's a huge hit.
Yep.
There's photos of pneumatic tubes on the Facebook group.
That's right. Everybody's going into their old office buildings and finding the little defunct pneumatic tube.
Because you often will see them right by, you go to a hotel that's old enough and there will be one right by the elevator.
To send room service requests down to the kitchen.
Please don't send us these photos now. Wait for the actual show there.
But a lot of the unions in America evolved out of the Industrial Revolution and the fact that at that point in time, early on in the Industrial Revolution, there had not yet consolidated all that capital into the hands of very few. It was still sort of, literally a Wild West, but also...
It's a land rush, sometimes literally.
One of the first and most powerful unions in the United States was the glassblowing union.
Really?
Because glassblowers were considered a very refined class of worker that had a high set of skills.
So even if you're like, I don't agree with unions, but you know who needs special protection is our fighting men and women in the glassblowing mines.
And there was a sense of glassblower unity. That owners, because glassblowers did all the bottles for medicaments and patent medicines,
unguents and poultices,
all the lab glass.
Plus alcohol.
Alcohol.
Like we can't. I'm sure that's the biggest use case.
And so there was a lot of pressure on manufacturers because the glassblowers were this high paid caste.
And it's a really skilled job. So they have a lot of power.
And so the owners continually tried to flood the market with lesser qualified glassblowers. And so glassblowers had to resist. At a certain point, there was an apprenticed program, a glassblower apprentice program, but it was run by the owners of the companies. And they tried to run as many apprentices through as they could to dilute the workforce.
Right.
And the glassblowers, part of their unionization was to try and take over the apprenticeship program so that they could choke off the supply.
You just show the apprentice glassblowers some really substandard glassblowing techniques.
Right. Just make them. Well, and so.
Hey, I taught you everything you know, but that doesn't mean I taught you everything I know.
Green glass was considered sort of a lesser glass compared to like crystal glass, and there are two different groups.
Is that right?
Of glass blowers.
Well, Coca-Cola is not going to sponsor this podcast anymore.
Well, they use white glass, didn't they?
I guess
clear glass in their bottles.
Coke used to have green bottles, and now they don't, huh?
Yeah. Well, boy, those were the days.
Those were the days.
Right? But then, as organized labor started to grow in popularity, really it was like miners, iron workers, wrought iron was very popular.
These seem like dangerous jobs. Is that kind of what drives it?
Well, there's
a lot of widows and orphans.
All jobs in the past were dangerous.
Yes, every job was equally dangerous.
There are very few Bartleby the Scriveners in this story, and a lot of people that are out
even
swinging
today,
a hammer.
If you go on Twitter, Scriveners are trying to unionize, and it'll be like, good news, we unionized BuzzFeed, and then it'll be like, oh, we failed to unionize FeedBuzz. GeekWire has fallen, but Wired has not. The Scriveners are still struggling.
Yeah, and it's, now we think of unions as being the province of kind of auto workers, but in the 19th century, of course, there was
manufacturing a thing was not where business was at, right?
Well, and there was so much labor involved in the expansion of the railroads, because it involved. What made the steel industry what it was that the railroads were expanding west. So there was all this mining that had to happen, all this refining, all this production of steel, all the mining of coal that would power the plants that were producing the steel to push the railroads. It was a huge, national enterprise. And
did it feel like it was patriotic to protect these workers? Like, this is what the West needs. This is for the frontier.
Well, no, because organized labor has always been a threat to sovereignty. It's. I'm
just wondering how public opinion shakes out on something like that.
Well, it sort of depends on where you live, right? And for instance, it wasn't until 1886 that the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, was founded. And it was a competition between two ideas of labor organizing. The AFL was organized around the idea. It was a style of union called a craft union, which understood organizing labor to be something that you did based on the particular skill set that you had as a worker. So a craft union, you would have a union of.
It would be bricklayers, but it would be across 10 industries instead of everybody who worked in the one plant.
Right.
Whatever.
And often, a limited amount of, or limited number of workers, if you could find a specialization that made sense, like, the green glass blowers and the white glass blowers would end up being in separate unions.
I guess that gives you some power. If you control everybody's access to labor of that kind, you're in a much better bargaining position.
That's right. If they shut down one key element in a manufacturing process, they could shut the whole operation down. And so it gave these craft unions a lot of power. But what it produced was a situation where labor was often pitted against itself, because the white glass blowers would strike, but the truck drivers would have to cross the picket line in order to perform their job, and they didn't feel any particular. There wasn't the sense that came later that unions all respected one another's strikes.
There'd be a very clear hierarchy, right? Like if it's hard to find and train skilled glassblowers, that's a union that has a lot of power and pull and leverage. Whereas if it's very easy to train somebody to drive the truck, then those guys have no pull at all.
And also the result of a glassblower strike would be improved conditions for glassblowers. But the truckers are on strike and losing wages
That's true.
And they don't benefit from the strike.
Plus, none of your medicaments come in bottles anymore. You have to buy like a gourd of Tylenol.
That's right. You have to, just get it in.
It just comes in a gourd of some kind.
You hold your hat out and they fill it with Tylenol. And the reason that there became a CIO, which I know we think of the AFL-CIO as a single organization, a union organization.
But that was a merger.
It was a merger, and the CIO originally split off from the AFL because they wanted to organize according to what was called an industrial union model, which was, as you said earlier, across unions, but top to bottom, up and down.
You've unionized a workplace.
That's right.
Okay.
So if a factory went on strike, everybody would go on strike there, and they'd shut the factory down. The idea being the longer the picket line, the shorter the strike had to be, and then all of the laborers would sort of mutually benefit from improved conditions, or you would strike as a group.
Solidarity. You start to build a little class solidarity.
That's exactly right. And there were a lot of things at stake. I mean, there were working conditions at stake. There were long hours.
Yeah, there was no 40-hour.
There was no 8-hour day. There was child labor. Women were paid not just sort of the fairly significant amount less than men that they're paid now.
Like they would be dreaming of 72 cents on the dollar.
I mean,
they would love that.
Women
they would run
were
into traffic for that.
They were paid children's wages. They were worked in conditions of complete servitude, but also in a lot of these coal mines and other industrial situations that happened closer to the frontier or up in the mountains of West Virginia or way out in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
The mine and the environment around the mine was completely isolated from anywhere else, any town or any stores or commerce of any kind. And so you got this company store model where the town owned the housing, the town owned the store, the town paid their workers in non-negotiable company script.
Your boss just owns you all
just
the time.
Owns you.
It's just the same as today with email, but
at
least you can go to Amazon.
They'd give you like advances on your pay, at which point you're now in debt to the company, so you're basically working to pay off your own, and they continue to extend you credit, and pretty soon, you're effectively
This is what happens,
slave.
John, when the workers don't organize.
This is what happens. That's right. And there were lots of strikes during this period. There was a big railroad strike in 1877 that kind of shut down the railroads. The railroad strike produced a lot of violence, and there was often. I mean, these strikes were often characterized by violence, and that violence came because this was during a period when it was much more overt than it is now that the owners controlled the political power that gave them the power to ask a governor to call in the National Guard. Mm-hmm. And in situations where the local law enforcement wouldn't support the owners, they had the power to call in their own private police forces, and what we would call Blackwater now, but they were domestic.
They were just big Irish guys.
Yeah, right. But
that's what Blackwater used to be called. Big for big Irish guys.
Big Irish guys. But, kind of thuggish sheriffs that would come in and often open fire.
Jeez.
The violence around the railroad strike in 1877 is part of why you see so many armories built in the centers of metropolitan areas. Those big brick armories that, those several in Brooklyn. There used to be one here in Seattle that overlooked the waterfront. Is
the one right under the Space Needle that's now a food court and an art center? Or was that also of that time?
That was a later armory that happened during World War I, because World War I was a time when those armories were repurposed. But the earlier armories that were built in the 19th century were built partly to as sort of redoubts and National Guard stockpiles
against the People's Uprisings.
Yeah, that's right.
Before the Kaiser, our real enemy was coal miners.
Coal miners and glass blowers and textile workers. one of the big original labor unions was the Knights of Labor.
I like that they're knights. Like, that really gets you on their side. It's very romantic.
Well, and the original name of the Knights of Labor was the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor.
See, it's kind of tying into these what do you call them, fraternal organizations of the time that do good in the community, the Knights of Columbus or whatever,
and very much connoted a kind of Masonic order. It was a secret society, but the model of labor union that the Knights of Labor practiced was across all work. So anyone that was a worker was eligible to join the Knights of Labor past a certain point, past the point that they decided to open themselves up and become like a general union of all working people. And one of the big things they wanted to do was pass the 8-hour work week. 8-hour work day. Wouldn't it be nice?
I want to pass the 8-hour work
basically
week.
You and I have an 8-hour work week.
That's the Podcasters Union first demand.
That brings us to the topic of today's show.
At long last. Almost 20 minutes in, as is our style, the style of the time. We get notes either way. We get complaints either way.
In 1837, in ye old Ireland.
Ooh, we're hopping back to before the American labor movement.
And we have referenced Ireland already several times in this show.
Lovingly, because of our deep affection for it.
And it feels like Ireland played a big role in the labor movement, or Irish immigrants rather, because the big immigration from Ireland happened sort of coincident with the rise of the industrial era.
I mostly am interested in the role of the Irish Bulgarians.
Irish Bulgarians?
Yeah, making all this happen.
I have a lot of firsthand experience with Irish Bulgarians that we'll get to later. Oh, no, we've gotten to already.
Yes.
Yeah. A young woman by the name of Mary Harris was born. I guess she was a very young woman when she was born.
Maybe for briefly, she might have been the youngest person on the planet.
For a few seconds, I'm sure she was. She was born to a large family in Ireland, and in the 1840s, during the disastrous potato famine there, they emigrated as a family to North America. They came to Canada first. She was went to a teacher's college, kind of raised to be she was
governess or instructress of some
that's
kind.
right. She was a smart gal and raised to be a teacher. Eventually, she sort of emigrated out of Canada following the work down to Chicago, and then eventually to Memphis, where she met and married a man by the name of George Jones, not the country star.
Stand by your man, Mary Harris.
And he was already a member of the International Molders and Founders Union.
Oh yeah, the IMFU,
which was founded in 1859, because this molders and founders.
Wait, what are molders? Okay, founders are in a foundry.
A foundry.
Are molders in a moldery?
Molders are from Moldova. They're working with wrought iron. They are iron workers.
It's different parts of the iron workers industry. Some people mold, some people found. Got it.
And she and he, built a happy life together. He was making a good enough living as a molder and founder that she sort of left her teaching life and devoted herself to the domestic arts.
I feel like you need to combine the molders and founders into one union and just call it the MFers.
That happened later.
I'm sure they didn't use that
The
name.
MFers, then the MFers. And they had built a pretty, middle-class life there, middle-class working people's life in Memphis. But in 1867, when our heroine, Mary Harris Jones, when she was 30 years old, a yellow fever epidemic struck the Memphis area.
Ooh.
This is a little bit of a cautionary tale for any anti-vaxxers that might be listening.
Or super intelligent mosquitoes.
Super intelligent yellow fever virus might be sitting on the edge of their chairs
You
right
did
now.
it. This was your big moment.
Yes.
This is like the moment in the Planet of the Apes prequels where the apes take over. Yay!
They're like, tell us more. What did we do?
You all confronted them on the Golden Gate Bridge and you got them.
Well, what you did in this instance, sentient yellow fever, is you killed George Jones and all 4 of their children.
Oh. wow.
So she lost her entire family to one, month-long yellow fever epidemic.
And that was just not unexpected at the time. That you were living with the knowledge that could happen any month.
It just happened.
This could be the month we all get cholera.
Yellow fever is one of those viral infections that has you can be inoculated against it, but once you contract the virus, you're just on the course. You ride it out. And even now, yellow fever, if it gets to the level of infection, kills about half the people that get it.
Wow. I just didn't realize it was, I think of it as a tropical disease, not a Memphis disease.
Well, it had, yellow fever was introduced to the Americas during the slave trade. And then once it was in Central America and South America, it follows the mosquitoes. And the mosquitoes, Memphis is a pretty boggy part of the United States. No offense to Memphians.
Memphites, I
think. Memphisians.
Memphissema? I'm pretty sure it's Memphites. Is that wrong?
Memphites?
You don't think that's right?
It can't possibly be Memphites.
We're going to get so many emails. I'm already unhappy about all the things we're going to have to read about the demonym of Memphis.
So it got hot and muggy that year, and the mosquitoes came up the river and killed her whole family.
Yikes!
So she left Memphis. She went back to Chicago, and she started a dressmaking business. She was now in labor. Her association with her husband, who was part of a labor union, and this is pretty mid 19th century, right? It's this. This all happened during the period of the Civil War, right? They met and married in 1861, and her family died in 1867. So labor is happening in the context of the Civil War during this period.
And I guess if she was in Memphis, like she's in a border state, I guess Confederacy, right?
Yeah, that would have been a Confederate port until it was lost.
So he's
in the Battle of Memphis.
He's making iron for the Confederate munitions and railroads.
I like to think that he was just making wrought iron for the riverboat gamblers, the balconies on the riverboats.
I think he was making iron he was working iron out of his love of iron.
That's right.
He just liked molding and founding. He doesn't even follow the greater events of state.
It was a craft union. He was probably making roulette tables
out of iron.
But she went to Chicago, where she'd passed through on her migration, and settled there and opened a dress shop, which in 1871, a mere 4 years later, was completely destroyed in the Chicago fire.
Oh my gosh. Mother Jones can't catch a break.
No. Mother Jones, now 34 years old, having lost everything.
Ex-Mother Jones.
Again. Well, she wasn't known as Mother Jones at this point. She was still Mary Harris Jones, M.H. During this period, it seems like all men who are engaged in union work or industrial work, or on both sides, labor side and owner side, are referred to by their first two initials. J.D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan.
Would you say that in person? Because you always see it on sign painting, it's R.W. Kerwin's haberdashery.
Right.
But would you really see him and go, R.W., it's been a while?
I believe you would. Do you know what J.P. Morgan's? It's John Pierpont Morgan, but you wouldn't have ever called him John.
I guess.
It's J.P. Morgan. That's how he's
But what if it's a W? That's just so many syllables.
W. Pierpont.
That's a case where the W, it probably takes longer to say than Warren or whatever the William or whatever the name is it's standing in for.
So my uncle's name was, he was known as C. Calvert Knutson.
Did people call him C?
No, they called him Cal.
Oh.
But his real name was,
Calvert.
It wasn't. He was not the protagonist of a mid-century novel. No, his real name was, I think, not Kookaburra, because that's a K. But I don't even know what was my uncle's name. It was
Charles.
No, I don't think so. He went with Calvert, so
it's worse than Calvert.
Yeah, I think it was
Cornwallis. Cuthbert.
It might have been Cuthbert.
We'll just say it was Cuthbert. Calvert.
I have no idea what my uncle's name was.
Oh, you're a replicant. We did it. We figured it out.
C. Knutson, but it was always C. Calvert. Mm-hmm. And it made me think for a while of going by J. Morgan Roderick.
Honestly, that's something that initials didn't actually die off until the counterculture of the 60s. U.S. presidents were always Harry S. Truman,
right.
Dwight D. Eisenhower. Men were traditionally first name, middle initial. That was kind of the last
Right.
fortification, the last stand of the initials. And then
did you ever call him William Jefferson Clinton?
No, it left. Who was the last one? Lyndon B. Johnson?
No, we did George W. because we distinguished him from George Herbert Walker.
But nobody was saying Ronald W. Reagan, James E. Carter.
No.
Like Richard M. Nixon was kind of the last of it, and he was a throwback to being Eisenhower's vice president.
Right. Gerald R. Ford, we did say.
I guess. So that was it. It was between
Gerald R. Ford.
So Carter ruined it. Carter killed initials?
Killed it. Well, it was
Kennedy
it was part of his 55-mile-an-hour speed limit.
America's just having too good a time with these initials. We need to zip up our sweaters and.
There's no better definition of malaise than not being able to use your middle initial anymore. But it was during the aftermath of the Chicago fire and the reconstruction of the Chicago fire that Mary Harris, or I guess now Mary H. Jones. She got involved. She watched the work that went on to rebuild Chicago, and became active in the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor, or the Knights of Labor. She became a kind of
because the construction guys rebuilding the city were all unionized, and
right.
So she's hanging out with union men.
She's hanging out with them, and became, she's like lost everything. But this is a community that she felt welcomed by, and she felt, a certain sort of. She was known as a great orator. She had a melodious voice. She had an ability to kind of. Captivate a room. She's
got that teacher's background, so
she does.
Classroom management, one of the first things you learn.
But she became radicalized and gradually radicalized. And I think, like a lot of people, she was radicalized by, in 1886, what was referred to as the Haymarket Affair.
Right.
And are you familiar with the Haymarket Affair?
Everybody who cares about the history of labor. And to this day, kids learn about Haymarket Square. I mean, you're not supposed. Well, we said Haymarket Square riot when I was a kid, and I think that has gone away because it's insufficiently pro-labor to claim that the people were rioting.
Right.
Haymarket Square massacre is too anti-capital.
So what happened? And we'll let the futurelings decide for themselves whether it was a riot or a massacre. But in May of 1886, there was a peaceful workers' demonstration, a gathering of all the workers there in Chicago, and they were agitating, which again immediately throws into question whether or not it was a peaceful. How do you agitate and it's also peaceful? I guess you can.
My washing machine can agitate, and I'm not like open fire on it.
But it doesn't sound peaceful. It's like
I feel like it's doing its thing. Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. And that was true of these workers. They were advocating for an 8-hour workday, and somewhere during the protest, someone threw a bomb.
And this is going to depend on whether you call it a riot or a massacre,
because the police had arrived and were trying to disperse the gathering.
They're on big horses.
And, dispersing the gathering is intrinsically a sort of anti-labor movement, or an anti-labor, gesture.
Oh, yeah, there's a constitutional right to assembly.
But they're sort of doing it, as you say, sort of, just riding their horses through and saying like, all right, everybody, let's break it up. Someone throws a bomb. Now, this was also during an era of anarchism ascendant.
That's just the fear that European bomb-chucking weirdos are going to come over to our shores.
That's right. Throwing their bombs and ruining America.
Big, black...
spy versus spy
spherical bombs with long, hissing fuses.
So the bomb blew up, among the police. Their guns were brandished on both sides. A gunfight ensued, and... 7 cops were dead, 7 coppers. Let's call them what they were.
Coppers.
And multiple minors were injured. 4 died, I think. But what happened was a group of the protesters or labor organizers were scapegoated, as they never found who threw the bomb, but they were
just get the ringleaders.
Yeah, and it was, they were adjudged to have constituted a conspiracy, and several of them were sent to the gallows. And this galvanized the American labor movement, and it radicalized Mary Jones.
She's in a training camp on Chicago's Lower East Side.
Well, that's right. Out there learning.
Is there a no-go zone?
Learning the jihad of this. And she had the innovative idea that if you were going to organize workers, what you needed to do, or an effective method, would be to organize their wives. So it wasn't sufficient to just send, and in some cases wasn't effective.
Like to reorganize their cupboards?
No, to join protests or to protest themselves, but both because they were sympathetic, but also because they had tremendous hold over their husbands and what their husbands were going to do or say during the day. So it was one thing for the men in a factory to all stand there and, huddle and rattle their wrought iron at the detectives, the Pinkerton detectives that were arrayed against them. But it was another thing for all the wives and children in a town to effectively go on strike, not let their husbands go to work. Or they often would stand out and bang brooms on trash can lids and say, strike, strike, strike. And a lot of this
can't open fire.
Can't open fire. But also the what was happening here was labor unions were trying to unionize industries and towns. And so it wasn't just that these protests were against the corporate fathers or the masters. It was also that the protests were meant to galvanize non-union families to join the union, at which point, they would then develop a majority and have negotiating power.
Right.
And so enlisting the wives and the children in this process, Mary Jones became a kind of a power in the labor force, or in the union force, because it had not occurred to anyone to do it before.
It doubles the turnout at your rallies.
Yeah, that's right. And this was happening, again, somewhat contemporaneously with the women's suffrage movement.
Do I get to do my impression of the women's suffrage lady from Mary Poppins?
Let's hear it.
We're merely soldiers in petticoats. I feel like I do this on the show a lot.
I don't know. I don't know.
Dauntless crusaders for women's votes.
That's very nice.
That's good.
It's good. Yeah, I think the futurelings
rock solid.
Run out and watch Mary Poppins right now to understand Ken's impression. Mary Jones ran somewhat afoul of the suffragettes because she did not advocate for women earning the franchise.
She did not want women to vote.
She was a member of that generation or that school of thought that said women don't need the vote. They already kind of control the household. And as long as they control how the men vote, why bother with all the shenanigans?
It's interesting that someone who has realized what a powerful force women can be in the labor movement doesn't also want to leverage that in the political arena.
Her quote was, "You don't need the vote to raise hell."
Does she feel like...
So she was a, hard-bitten, cigar-chomping labor organizer.
I just wonder what her response would be to, what if you could raise more hell with the vote? Continue to raise your current amount of hell, but you could amp that hell up with the franchise.
Yeah, and I think culturally at the time, the idea of, really...
Yeah, if it just strikes you as wrong from where you come from, and then you're just inventing reasons,
but also,
that's one thing.
I think people at the time were arguing whether or not populism and extending the vote to uneducated minors was a good idea. It hadn't been that long before that the vote was much more restricted.
But you'd think her working class milieu would fight against that.
You would.
She's not somebody who thinks that it's dangerous for poor factory workers to vote.
Well, and when she was accused of being anti women's votes, she pushed back and said anything that uplifts the class, the lower class, I'm in favor of. I just don't currently see how the women's vote does it.
It could be one of these this is not our battle thing. All the LGBT activists that were not pro-gay marriage because they thought it was not the next battle. It was counterproductive. There were other things you could win, and we're surprised at how fast it happened.
And I think that's true. And I think maybe it also felt to her like something that was never going to happen.
Right.
And so why get distracted by
it's distraction.
Yeah. But she became a well-known person in the United States, always turning up at union events, building union membership. And during this period, she adopted this persona of Mother Jones. She would arrive.
She's doing character work?
She really did. She would kind of arrive in a town, and she had this sort of tone and way where she, almost infantilized the men by calling them her boys. She
squeezing cheeks and stuff.
Yeah, she put herself up in a very powerful position of a loving mother that made both the union members feel like a lot of affection for her, but also made her somewhat unimpeachable on the national stage. She wasn't there wearing dungarees and being a masculine figure that could have divided public opinion. She's
a nice older lady.
She was, and she started dressing in a very matronly way.
Because she's not that old, right? She's
not that old, but she starts exaggerating her age, a very unusual thing, I think, for anyone to do at any time. But
a woman in her 40s especially.
A woman in her 40s to start describing herself as being in her 60s in order to create this character,
movement.
this personage of Mother Jones.
That's great that she's working on some new sketch characters.
It's pretty hot stuff, right?
I'm imagining her looking like Dana Carvey with the wig on or something. She's a church lady type.
She had a big effect on the mining union. She showed up at a lot of those coal mine protests. There was in West Virginia in particular, in Pennsylvania, there was a whole period where, like in northern West Virginia, most of the coal mines were unionized, but in southern West Virginia, down around the Kentucky border, it was very mountainous terrain, very rural, very isolated, and the mines down there were far enough away that they hadn't been unionized yet. So miners in the north doing coal mining were getting paid a lot more and working under better conditions than miners in the south, because the southern coal mines had a company store.
They had been able to keep out the rabble-rousers.
They had. And so when labor unions tried to get in there, it was the owner class sort of saw it as a last stand kind of situation. It was the last redoubt. And to organize those areas would have been, it's the same argument that owners make always, and they make it today. They made it here in Seattle about the $15 an hour minimum wage that we enacted a couple of years ago. The argument is always the same.
What's bad for business is bad for America.
And if we do this, if we pay people $2 an hour more, if we cut working hours to 8 hours a day, we will no longer be profitable and we'll have to close. And everyone will lose their jobs. How do you like it now?
And nowadays you can say, in some other place, it just means that all the business will go to China.
Yeah, all the business will go to China. And it's always been thus, right? This is always the argument of management.
We'll take our ball and go home.
We cannot give you these concessions.
We'd love to.
We would. But we'll have to close, and you'll all be out of work, and your children will starve.
What do you want? Your crappy job or no job?
Right. And I think the history of work demonstrates that when labor exacts some of these concessions, businesses generally stay open.
So many people, even on the sensible left, wanted Seattle's $15 minimum wage to fail terribly.
Well, yeah, because there was the sensible left said, well,
too soon,
and they're going to end up making less because they lose their tips,
yeah,
and all this stuff. And it was 6 months of people trying to figure out whether to give tips or not. There were all those restaurant owners who were like, we now include tips in the cost of the meal, and because blah, and then the waiters and bartenders were saying, yeah, the owners are taking 30% of the tips now, just like so. So predictable.
Sometimes they would just add a surcharge after, so it wouldn't even be in the cost on the menu. there'd be a thing at the bottom that said, and we add such and such
20% to every meal. It's not your choice.
Yeah, no tipping, but also we're not going to actually raise our prices because that would look bad.
By the turn of the century, 1901, Mother Jones had started to crusade on behalf of female workers and children in the factories. There were still a lot of children as part of the workforce. In fact, something on the order of 1/6 of all kids in America had a job.
Wow.
In 1901.
I wish my kids had a job.
I know.
I'm jealous of these
kids. I got
kids.
a couple of jobs my daughter could do around here, like emptying the dishwasher once in a while.
Would it kill him?
She knows how to do it. I taught her how to make coffee, which was my signature move. So because she likes it because it feels like an adult thing. So I can say, go make coffee, and she'll make a pretty halfway decent cup.
Does she spell your name wrong on your cup?
No.
She like, Jim?
No. Every cup in this house has my picture stenciled on it. But there were, this was also an era of textiles and textile mills. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that work was done by teenage girls, children. Their hands could get into the machines and do the delicate work. Their little hands.
It's Snowpiercer.
That's right. And so Mother Jones attempted to make this a cause celeb, but she discovered that in trying to publicize it and popularize the notion that children shouldn't have jobs, she realized that by this point in time, the sort of capitalist intertwined network of the owner class meant that most mill owners also were stockholders in newspapers. And so none of the newspapers would cover, during this period, a lot of the labor agitation because it really was a sort of a backroom deal. The reporters wanted to cover it, but the editors wouldn't put it on the front page.
Some of the child labor stuff must be a hard sell for the working class as well. Because what you're really saying is, maybe 3 of the incomes in your household should not be there.
Right.
And it would be better for America if your kids were in school, but it's going to cut your income in half.
To take the kids out of the factories and the young women out of the factories does sort of paternalize work. Mm-hmm. But this was also during an era of education reform. So the idea that the American notion, the meritocratic idea that education will lift you out of poverty.
My kids will have a better life if I can get them out of the factory into school.
Right. And so there were public schools, and that was a social movement. And the idea that these children were working in factories, essentially dooming themselves to a lifetime of, severed fingers and whatnot.
Mercury poisoning.
While affluent kids were going to school and bettering their lives.
Pushing a hoop with a stick.
That's right. Using their roller skate key. That became part of the language of the organization or of the organizing movement.
I guess once the kids are out of the factories, wages go up for who's left.
And work becomes skilled work becomes skilled. Now, this is also happening during a period when the industrialization and the mechanization of work is happening apace. So a lot of these jobs are becoming automated, right? But Mother Jones's, when she realized that she was not getting any traction in her protest, organized a march, a children's crusade, to march from Philadelphia to Theodore Roosevelt's home in Oyster Bay, New York. He was president at the time.
It's kind of a long walk.
Pretty long walk.
You got to walk across New Jersey.
It's no hands across America, but
hands across New Jersey.
It is a long walk, and during the whole, and so then of course the newspapers had to cover this giant march of children and young girls who were marching to TR's house.
He's president at the time.
Yeah, she tried to get his attention and never did get a satisfying response from him. But it did now make the newspapers and started to stoke public opinion to to the degree that laws began to change. The 8-hour workday had been instituted by this point, but excuse me, the movement to end child labor then really took hold as a result of her agitation. And it was then during this sort of pre-war period, and we've talked about this a lot in recent omnibi. I'm going to get so many letters for saying omnibi. 1912, 1913 was a time when the national consensus, the labor unions had effectively become a political force in the United States, but there were still these holdouts, and the Cold Wars were still going on. But there was an extremely galvanizing fight called the Paint Creek Cabin Creek coal strike, and Mother Jones was now a national figure. So much so that she had been denounced on the Senate floor as the most dangerous woman in America. And she would bounce from protest to protest, kind of like a Al Sharpton character.
You'd call her in?
Yeah. And at the Paint Creek, Cabin Creek, this was a situation where the miners, it had come down to this granular level. The miners that worked on Paint Creek were being paid 2.5 cents more than the miners on Cabin Creek because one group was unionized and the other wasn't.
Was this where, Pennsylvania or West Virginia?
It was West Virginia. And the Baldwin Fetz Detective Agency was in there shooting people, and it was a big, hullabaloo. And Mother Jones arrives and is arrested. But the governor had declared martial law, so she was arrested by the military.
She's a POW.
And subjected to a court-martial.
Wait.
And I didn't realize that a civilian could be court-martialed.
Now I have a new goal. Like, I've never thought I was eligible for a court-martial. Now I kind of want to do it.
Well, you need military law first. You need martial law.
Go somewhere where martial law has been declared.
And then get in trouble.
Go to a major U.S. city during a Godzilla movie.
And I don't think there's enough to be burglar or something. You have to do something that warrants a military tribunal.
Poke an officer with a hat pin or something.
But she was sentenced to 20 years in prison.
Whoa. Now
it was very symbolic, right? Because she was, kind of held in house arrest status.
This is always huge. The movement loves this, right?
Yeah, they just loved it. And it actually resulted in some reform. She was released after a couple of months, 3 months maybe, as the Senate started to everyone recognized, and I think the owners recognized that they were on the losing end of this battle. The arc of history bent toward justice in this instance. And she was released and reform started to happen within the coal industry.
It worked? They took the money and spread it out equal, just like the Bible and prophets suggest?
Not quite. In fact, later on, not that long afterwards, the coal strikes and the energy of the labor movement in the sort of mining industry shifted focus to Colorado, where a lot of the more active and the bigger mines, and the non-unionized mines were all in that sort of the Rocky Mountain states now. And often what would happen is strikers in company town scenarios, the response from the owners would be to fire them and kick them out. And so you have a whole class of strikers who are living way out on the frontier, or the frontier,
even,
and all of a sudden they're fired, and detectives arrive and expel them from their homes because their homes are owned by the company, and then their script, they don't get paid. Their script is no longer valid in the company stores.
They're in the middle of nowhere.
Nowhere.
They don't have options.
So in the case of there's an incident in Ludlow, Colorado, where there were 1,000 or more minor families living in a tent city as part of their strike, and the mine owners drove through the tent city on a train. I guess it was on either side of the train tracks.
Yeah, don't build your tent city on a railroad
not
track.
on the train tracks, but on either side. And they drove this armored train through there with machine guns and just shooting into the tents.
Wow.
And it was, it was Mother Jones that called attention to it. And actually, John D. Rockefeller traveled out. John D. Rockefeller, who had been consistently one of the villains in all of these stories, actually went out to Ludlow, Colorado, investigated or saw firsthand what had happened, and then he began to reform his own conglomerates to incorporate new labor policies.
That's interesting that the media attention might, convince 10,000 people back east, but what you really need is for John D. Rockefeller to get on a train.
Yeah, and I think that was a personal response to Mother Jones's entreaties and her, she was such a great orator. She was by now, of course, a national figure and had been for decades.
I guess we don't know if he was just embarrassed or if his heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Maybe both things, right? Maybe his little dog pulled that sleigh full of presents up from Whoville.
Because today no one's trying to convince Mark Zuckerberg that he's doing something wrong. Really, the best you can do is embarrass Elon Musk, make Bezos look bad by showing, the awful thing that awful life Amazon delivery people have, And
it no longer works, right? But I feel like once you reach a tipping point where Rockefeller's already sitting in his office going, is this worth it? Like, is machine gunning workers worth it, or should we just pay them 2 cents an hour more?
They're all like, well, Morgan's machine gunning workers.
Yeah.
I mean, you gotta keep up with the Joneses.
Keep up with the Mother Joneses.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
In 1930, and Mother Jones did not keep entirely abreast of the changes in the labor movement. We talked today about the socialists, the rise of the socialists now in early 2020, or what? Yeah. There's a lot of energy, at least vocal energy, directed toward the idea of socialism now as a political means, and that was true of this era too. American socialists have long been sort of split into two factions. There are the Social Democrats, and then there are the Democratic Socialists.
That seems confusing. They need better names.
They do, but they've really galvanized around these two terms, so we have to endure it, and I'm often confused by it.
Fine.
The Social Democrats are the ones that are socialists, but ultimately they're Democrats.
This is just European style government. They're not anti-capitalist.
No, they want to reform capitalism. They want to, they want to change the wealth inequality. They want to restrict the concentration of capital in a 1%. They want to have a more distributive and collective kind of.
But you do it with policy, not with
that's right.
Not with centralization or nationalization of industry.
That's right.
You raise taxes or improve safety nets or whatever.
Whereas Democratic Socialists,
rose emoji,
want to transform the whole system. They are anti-capitalist, and they want to bring a kind of centralized economy, as you said, like a governed economy.
This is me and my Marxist dads. We get together and watch the game and talk about Trotsky ideology.
Yeah, you and your Marxist dads.
We're talking about the dialectic during halftime.
And then you pull out your phones and you check your bank accounts.
That's right. We're doing great.
And so, this is this schism. And for a lot of the time, there's I think Democratic Socialists and Social Democrats combine forces
to become the Democratic Socialist Democrats.
It's an unholy alliance, right? And because the names are so confusing, and because I think even within the membership there's a lot of confusion.
And there's definitely more internecine squabbling, within a movement than around it. You know?
Because often, although Democratic Socialists have a much purer ideology, they often in America have to make concessions that really go against the purity of their beliefs.
It's something I did not know until Twitter taught me.
Yeah.
Is that there, if there's one thing that leftists dislike more than conservatism, it's
other
liberals.
leftists.
It's
That's
liberals.
right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Mother Jones didn't navigate all of that too carefully, and as she got older, she made some mistakes.
That
She allied
happens
with
in
the
every
wrong
movement.
side.
You've
It
always
does.
got the old guy from the first wave feminists showing up, or the grandfather of some LGBT rights movement, or the civil rights guy who has not kept up and says something into a mic that she shouldn't have. Like
Right.
this happens in all kinds of activist movement. What was Mother Jones's
Well, in 1930,
insufficient wokeness?
In 1930, she celebrated her 100th birthday.
That's so unusual even today,
And
much less with 19th century genetics.
Well, it was especially unusual given that she was only 87 years old.
Oh. She never took off the church lady wig?
She never did. And she was, she was roundly celebrated for her 100th birthday. It was a big, sort of national event.
That's hilarious. That would be like if Flip Wilson's Geraldine turned 100 or something, and everybody would be like, yay, Geraldine.
There just wasn't as much, there weren't as many truthers. There wasn't as much birtherism as there is now. And so, but she had, she'd been sort of somewhat sidelined by the direction the labor movement took. After some of these schisms between the Democratic Socialists and the Social Democrats, this was during the era of the rise of the American Communist Party that we saw in bold relief after World War II, when when there were a list of 89 communists in the State Department.
People were actually worried about Bolshevism.
400 communists, or however many McCarthy found. What was it? Some number of communists.
The number's different every time he said it. That's what I learned from Manchurian Canada.
But when she died, she was not a figure. She wasn't a figure in scandal, but she was a. She had been bypassed by the time, but because the labor movement continued to evolve as time went on, her reputation post-mortem started to be rehabilitated, and she started to be recognized as a hero of the labor movement. And at some point, a group of unions got together and built her a big sort of pink marble obelisk where she'd been buried kind of under a humble headstone
Does
before.
it have to be pink? It's like a Mary Kay woman.
She was against the vote. She was always, a ladies'
That's right.
lady. But it, she has this obelisk that's flanked on either side by statues of miners in mining repose.
Is this Chicago? Where is this?
Yeah. And then her reputation continued to grow. There is there's a holiday devoted to her now.
There is? I don't
you,
celebrate Mother Jones Day. When
you don't?
You didn't get me a card. You didn't get me flowers.
Her quote.
I celebrate Mother's Day. Is that what you're talking about? Is this where Mother's Day comes from?
It is. It started with Mother Jones. No, Mother's Day, or it's what is it? It's not International Women's Day, is it? Is that also Mother Jones Day? Maybe.
Oh no, it's in October. It's a Miners' Day.
Oh, okay, Miners' Day,
which is also called
Mother Jones Day.
Because she's the center of that movement.
It became the slogan of miners everywhere, which was pray for the dead and fight like hell for the living. But I think her greatest legacy was in the 1970s. Mother Jones magazine,
sure,
named themselves after her and became probably the preeminent radical magazine of at least our formative years,
and still around, still a online periodical. I don't want to say going strong, because that's what then the magazine closes. Nobody's going strong, but Mother Jones is still important, influential voice of the left.
Well, I doubt they pray for the dead, but I bet they do fight like hell for the living.
And that concludes Mother Jones, entry 675.MK0333. Certificate number 12952 in the omnibus. Now, before we leave you, we want to remind you that people of our era could follow John on Twitter and Instagram at John Roderick. I was at Ken Jennings. Collectively, we were at Omnibus Project. Appreciative listeners of the show congregated on Facebook as the Futurelings and some kind of similarly named forum on Reddit as well. We welcomed digital communication from our listeners at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. Physical items could be sent to the Omnibus Project, P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington 98155. Our correspondent Sparky sent us this from, he's usually road tripping around the United States as a trucker, I think, but this is from a cave in Belize.
Oh, sure, I know him. The Sparkster.
He wanted to go there because of the scuba diving and jungle adventures and puns. He got a keychain that says, "You better Belize it." It looks like a great cave, but it's not a great pun.
That's why you went to Belize? I have serious doubts.
I feel like you could just get the keychain without going on a plane.
I've heard very nice things about Belize.
You
better Belize it.
You better Belize it. I'm going in February.
Oh.
I think I want to go to this very cave, and my wife does not.
Right.
You have to swim through things and squeeze through things.
Oh, I don't like that.
She doesn't.
I don't like that. It's a cenote of some kind, I'm guessing.
Are you, I think the Mayans believed it was the entrance to the Mictlan or the underworld. Are you claustrophobic?
Yes. I do not like going through small spaces to get into a space that I can't get out of without going back through a small space.
And yet you were born.
Once.
Never.
I wouldn't let it happen again.
Your first words.
That's right.
Never again. So you can send us physical items there. If you wish to send us financial support, we are so grateful that the show now in its independent state appears to be a going concern. And that's because of the generosity and affection shown by our contemporaneous listeners. If you would like to make a donation and avail yourself of some of the perks that come with it, a monthly addendum show of addenda, then if 8 or 9 of these a month is not enough for you for some reason, first of all, congratulations on your 8-hour workday, 8-hour work week. But if you crave more content, that's one of the perks that comes with donation at patreon.com/Omnibus Project.
Right. Good job. Is that everything?
I have to. It just gets longer every time. It's like one of those hilarious campfire songs that gets longer every time, and I've always hated them.
99 bottles of Omnibus on the wall. Most Omnibus listeners, I think, are dissecting crawdads, or they are installing like plates on a satellite or something.
Oh, they're working. They're in their craft union while they listen. Yeah,
they're able to listen to the show and also do their extremely complicated technical science job.
You know why you can do that? Mother Jones. Union negotiated right to listen to Omnibus on the job.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, from within our 8-hour work week, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. We work a lot harder than 8 hours a week. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I don't want to depress donations by bragging about our leisurely lifestyle.
No,
we work hard for our living, and you better treat us right.
We hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.
Why do you travel? To recover from heartbreak? To trace your DNA? Escape the internet? On our podcast, A Way to Go, we've been exploring all the reasons we travel. I'm Geraldine Gerba. I'm Pavia Rosati. And together we're the founders of travel website Fathom. And we've already heard so many great stories. Such as an actress in rural Kenya explaining the ins and outs of safe sex. A graffiti artist tagging the islands of Southeast Asia. A producer arranging high-fashion photo shoots in the desert. Listen to A Way to Go on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.